Hello and welcome to the next episode of the AnsweRED podcast. My name is Paweł Burza and I will be one of your hosts because, as always, I am joined by my co-host.
Hey, Sebastian Kalemba here.
And today we're taking on the topic of localization and adaptation. These are very important things for us at AnsweRED. And we have two amazing guests sitting in with us. Who are they?
Man, we have the one and only Mikołaj Szwed, who's our localization director, and Borys Pugacz-Muraszkiewicz, who's our English adaptation director. And man, I can't wait because the way how much actually we care about the adaptation in this company since the very beginning is like we care a lot, and we treat it as an art form. So I can't wait to dig into it.
Yeah, let's get into it and let's meet our guests. All right, guys, welcome to the studio. Today's topic, adaptation, localization. We're taking two things. So we want to start off very general and then we'll go into details. So adaptation versus localization, like what's the difference? Because we know games are localized in multiple languages, but sometimes it's just hard translation. There's not really room for adaptation.
I think it's not about comparing adaptation and localization, because adaptation is part of localization, but more the distinction between translation and adaptation.
Perfect.
Because this is something, the adaptation goes a little bit more into the depth of the matters. As you said, the translation is something maybe more literal, but basically being a graduate of applied linguistics, I can tell you there is no strict border where you say okay, this is translation, this is adaptation. Yeah. So the borders are blurry, and it's all about the assumption and kind of modus operandi you choose to how to localize or translate your text. So the moment you actually start venturing into more in the field of artistic freedom, adding more stuff that's, for example, relevant for a given culture, for a given country, for a given language, then the translation slowly starts becoming an adaptation. That's how I would describe it.
Well, I don't know, cultural specificities that you add and so on and so forth. I mean, to my mind, that's still within sort of the realm of localization, where you start, because ultimately what you want to do is you want to take a source and you want to render it in completely idiomatic language. You're not going to translate metaphors, similes, or other literary devices. You're going to adapt them. You're going to localize them to have an equivalent in the target language. But adaptation, I don't think it's blurry in terms of sort of the call it ethnic color that you end up adding. The source being in Polish doesn't distinguish in the Polish language between Polish-speaking with a slightly Latino accent or a slightly Asian accent and so on and so forth. Whereas in the target languages, well, at least in English, we definitely did that, you know.
There's a small technical break. Borys, we've been asked specifically not to bump with our hands on the table.
Oh, did I bump
yes,
the table?
All the time.
I believe it's a cultural thing.
Yeah, it is a cultural thing. This is adaptation.
Very expressive.
This is the unblurred adaptation.
Actually, there was an interesting. I can't remember the name of the game, but recently there was an article published about some Japanese game that has been localized into English, and some people started complaining that the English does not follow word by word the Japanese original, and that the actual translators or localizers decided to embellish the language into more of something that you'd expect of a fantasy setting in English, which for me as a localization professional sounded like just simply absurd, because this is not how you that's how you localize games. It's not about putting word by word, from one language to the other.
It's something that is also very specific for anime also, because people that understand Japanese, they want to watch it and experience it in Japanese instead of having it localized into English, and then from English, let's say, to Polish, because I feel like there are things that, they get lost in translation throughout the whole process, because like either they're adapted or they're not translated word for word, and then people come like, oh well, you know, actually in that scene he or she said this, not that. Right?
Okay, so if, in terms of that, okay, we try not to lose anything in translation. Actually, what we try to do,
You actually want to add.
and yes, in adapting, we want to add value, not, and definitely the things that we can't lose in adaptation is, I would say, the quest instructions, if there's something, absolutely pertinent to furthering the action, yes, the information has to be in there. I don't know, in general, say the mood of the scene. But beyond that, outside of that, really, you take the intent of the line in the source language and you render that intent in the target language. And you render that intent with the right dose of emotion and with, the phrasing that you need in order to, sorry, I'm knocking on the table again, with whatever wording and whatever phrasing and whatever cadence you need in order to convey A, the information, B, the emotion, C,
Borys,
also
but let's make
color the character.
But let's talk about the structure of your work, like the way you work, the way you think, because we do care a lot about adaptation and about characters.
Yes.
And you already actually teased a little bit the process.
Yes.
And I would love to really, talk a little bit about your process, the way you think about this culture aspect, the way you actually approach particular language, where you start, why, how do you follow the some principles of, let's say, even story, because you are going into the really in depth of your craft, and I believe it's an art form, in my opinion, to make really amazing adaptation, and you can totally distinguish things that are adapted really well and things that are adapted so. And I believe that we care a lot about this, and let's talk about this process, about your thought process, your approach. How do you tackle it?
I can start a little bit.
Yeah,
That's a lot to
start.
Yeah, and I will. You'll just continue on that.
All right.
I think the most important thing is to actually think about what needs to be done to actually have a game that feels written in a language and it's idiomatic for that. And our English versions of our games are a perfect example of that, because there are things that we need to follow in order to actually have the English version be totally idiomatic, that, for example, doesn't need to be done in Polish or can't be done in Polish. Prime example is Cyberpunk 2077, which was also written in Polish. But, for example, we don't have all those idiolects or ethnic dialects in Polish. So our Polish writers could never write dialogues that would be simply to translate from Polish into English to get an idiomatic version. And for people who are native speakers of English and they know the culture and stuff, this would be a half-baked product if there wasn't this additional color added, especially with Night City being this, melting pot of people from different backgrounds and exactly. And for example, this is Borys's and his team job to actually think about it and kind of shape the language in a sense that this is the bare minimum, because of course they did much more than that. And I'm pretty sure that all the people who actually played Cyberpunk noticed that the language that's used there is not even contemporary English. It's our imagination, or Borys's imagination, of how the language would sound like in 50 years in terms of grammar. In
a parallel reality at the same time, right?
Yeah. So basically it's a mix of both actually taking into account those existing ethnic dialects, idiolects and stuff, and also on top of that, this language design of a language of the future, so where it will go in terms of the development of the grammar, the slang, those all those new words that are being created, even
degradation of grammar.
But this is actually linguistic theory, that when you have a language, it basically the language has the tendency to become simpler over time because they're a tool of communication. So it's not only that we just imagine like that. This is something that actually has a scientific background.
It's proven.
And the other thing is speaking about slang, even if you went back 20 years to 20 years ago and started talking to someone, there's so many words existing now that people 20 years ago wouldn't even understand.
But also, if you went back 20 years, they would say so many words that have died since.
Yes. But sometimes they reemerge.
That's another thing.
A lot of always evolving.
Yes, it's more of a sine curve. It's not a one-way street. You know.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything?
Well, that was
because the process I feel like is a big chunk. Like
it's a big chunk.
But if you had to like structure it, like starting from a script, I remember there were so many like ideas amongst the community. Like, was Witcher first done in Polish or in English? And no one knew, and it was like we would say that
that's actually a point of pride for us. No.
It's been always coming up, right?
But I mean, that's a point of pride for us that like we're able to produce localized versions that call into doubt whether or not they were actually written in the localized language.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a point of pride for us.
So basically, English is also a localization. Exactly. Looking at that, because since we're dealing with all, like Borys is dealing with English, I'm dealing with all the other languages. It's kind of annoying for me to constantly listen like, oh, I only want to play in the original language. I was like, original, like you mean English or Polish, or what's your point, right? That's not how to approach it. So, but again, like all our games up till now were written in Polish. I'm repeating that once again for anybody who has been wondering about that. But yeah, the great work done by Borys and his team actually makes it hard to kind of imagine that it wasn't actually done.
Yeah, Borys is a legend in this studio. That's true.
How many years have you been here?
That's how I see you always.
How many years have you been around?
Like 40 years?
No.
Wait, how long has this company been running? Over 20 something? Oh, it's going to be 30 years or something like this this year?
Before.
So he was even before that.
Exactly.
Before CDPR.
So again, getting back to the process.
Okay, but back to the process.
Yes.
We start with the script.
Yeah, so you have a script. And in that script, you have characters. And we use a system of voice tags, or at least in Cyberpunk, I'm sorry, now I'm moving my hand across the table.
Totally fine. We'll edit that so it's perfect.
Have the AI take care of it. But
please remove this table, guys.
And the voice tag sort of defines the I don't know, age of the speaker, the ethnicity of the speaker, I don't know, call it social standing of the speaker. I mean, you're going to do, somebody who lives in the streets, literally differently than you're going to do a high-ranking corpo.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I always believe that especially in writing dialogue, you have to write through every character, and basically you're sitting there and you're flipping switches in your mind constantly. Okay, so I'm writing the lines of this specific person right now, and they are this, and they know this much, and their vocabulary is this, and their pronunciation is going to be XYZ. Because also in our scripts, we actually put in the characteristics of the various accents and the various dialects. That goes for The Witcher as much as it went for the Witcher franchise, as much as it went for Cyberpunk. And when you have a named character, especially, you want to have a clear idea of who they are just strictly through the way they speak, and so you're going to steer him in, rendering him in the target language. You're going to steer him or her in a specific direction. Wakako Okada is going to be completely different than Jackie Wells, and in actually doing the dialogue in English, you have to keep switching between those various modes of the various characters that you're handling in a given scene. You know?
I would even have to say that, like, you're saying that it starts with a script, but like that's not even completely true, but because it starts even with the world. Like if you have the lore, you have like specific regions, and this is how we actually develop our games. You start this thought process about how you want to shape the language of specific communities. I was actually we all in the in the team, we were all kind of happy when we actually encountered some, I don't know, months ago on Reddit, a very comprehensive post and of people who were like, hey, have you actually noticed that the nomads talk completely differently than the people from Night City? They don't use contractions, they use like full sentences and stuff like that. And that was a deliberate choice of Borys and his team. Like there is a whole like lore behind it, that the nomads were actually educating their children using old textbooks.
One room schoolhouse.
Yeah, exactly. So and it was cool
and
that actually people noticed
and they
that.
don't integrate with the street.
Yeah, and there was a whole discussion about it.
And they're
on Reddit.
Insular in and of themselves, right? You know.
Yeah. So these are those small things that like we always feel that makes localization special, right? So there are different techniques we can use for different language versions because as said, like English has this variety of accents and ethnic dialects, etc., which are not present in most of the other languages. Or for example, some of the languages have only specific types of dialects for specific people. Like for example, we have European Spanish, and we made this decision that like the game is European Spanish, but all the Latin characters in the Spanish version are actually talking in Latin American Spanish, Mexican Spanish, as opposed to the European Spanish. So there is no one clear solution for each language version. You have to kind of approach it with care, and also thinking about what will feel cool and kind of organic for players that will play this in a given language. Like
does
German
it also have to be like unique, or is it just organic in the sense of that is based off of like a feeling, or is it based off of like something more to it? Like,
I mean, it depends. But a lot of like language is not mathematics, so it's all like a lot about feeling. For example, I've been taking care of the German version, and we made the decision like, okay, German is a pretty multicultural country, so there are people of from different countries that speak German. So we decided that, for example, we'll have people speaking like German with Spanish accents, like Jackie, where we had actually an actor that is half Spanish, half German, and he can actually do German with Spanish accents. Or for example, for those Japanese characters, we actually found Japanese people who speak German to actually convey this. But on the other hand, for example, we don't have this distinction with for example, African American, right? Because there is no like kind of clear counterpart of that in German. So you basically have to weigh those options. And there are some languages, for example, Asian ones, where like you don't do that at all because it would just feel out of place there. So it's always like a matter of like, okay, sitting down and thinking what will be the best solution. I had this actually example also from German, for example, from the first Cyberpunk demo. Cyberpunk is kind of special in a sense that, for example, that it takes place in United States, so to say. So in a clear, place. So the question was like, okay, so what do we actually translate into German, and what do we leave in English? Because German also has a lot of like English terms, sipping into the language. And for example, there was this like anabolic of the animals that was called the juice, and we actually translated it as Saft, which is like juice in German. And there was like a lot of people said, oh, that just feels so out of place, and we changed that after the demo, right? So it's a lot of it is really depends on like the language feeling. You don't always also kind of decide on the right thing, because people will have different opinions, but you have to kind of try your best.
Well, and all that being true, I also think you have to dare.
Well, yes.
I think you've got to dare all over the place. I mean, I still don't understand why dwarves in the Witcher world
Damn, you got to my question.
well, no. I do not understand why dwarves in the Witcher world can't speak with a Silesian accent and Silesian dialect. To me, it would be absolutely perfect for a plethora of reasons. It's at this point sort of a trope, a tried and true. Well, I would say tried and true in the sense that it's proven itself. That dwarves, wherever you encounter them in fantasy IPs, are Scottish. And I do think that there are, I think, both game developers out there and TV producers out there that don't dare enough.
I respect that. But it is.
We'll see that for the future Witcher game.
It is going the extra mile. But you said that it's not based off a script, but it's based off an idea of the world. Do you also use like visuals in order to, like develop things for characters, or is it only based off of?
I mean, there's no such thing as casting. I mean, it's impossible, I think, to cast a character without actually having a reliable visual for that character. I can't imagine that I can't imagine that we could have cast Jackie Wells without
Jackie was on my list also.
Seeing that guy, as broad, with shoulders as broad as a refrigerator, and his little ponytail and so on and so forth, and not, I mean, if you cast it without a vacuum, how are you possibly going to get the voice right for that character?
It's like impossible, and actually we blend nicely to the question about picking the right voice.
Yeah. For the job.
Because
that's super difficult. Right?
Oh, it's super difficult. Yeah. And one thing is actually matching it with visuals, but another thing is actually matching with the fantasy and the world that you, Mikołaj, mentioned, and that makes it all tricky because so many parts that you need to connect, and it takes months. And I remember, for example, for me and for you, it's definitely a different memory. But for me, when I was like working in a total different department, a big thing was the placide. Let's say, representing voodoo guys, and I remember that you've been guys like really looking for him, at least the way I remember it, like a long time. But finally, you found the guy, and I was so impressed by the way he sounds.
It was incredible delivery. Like it was also like the mix of the Haitian Creole was incredible for me when I first saw it in the demo. I was like, wow. Of course, it was translated for you because you had the proper cybernetics, but still, like that was something that I did not expect, right?
Yeah. Actually, this is again about this authenticity. But like in general, casting is a very important part of the process, and you really need to take time and do it properly.
It's easily 50% of getting the role right.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, maybe this isn't the place, but I do have to just tip my hat and bow deeply to all of the cast we've had throughout our games. I don't know. I could name dozens of names of people who are just going to be, they're going to. I'm going to remember them to the end of my life because they just came through in such a big way.
And you have to imagine that, like, for games of this scale, you're spending hours and hours and like weeks and months with those people. Well, like when it comes to the actual recordings, especially for the main characters like Geralt or V's, like we know those people
there's
because
so many lines.
There's so many lines. There's so many hours of recordings. You get to know those people. You laugh with them. You have hard times with them. It's really amazing. But like as Borys said, picking the right voice is like. It's needed to actually be successful, and also like if you don't do it right, it's very hard to kind of get this successful performance.
Yeah, and actually, in going into casting, you don't necessarily have. Maybe you'll have a reference for some characters. Maybe you'll have no art at all. Maybe a character will be a blank slate, and I mean we delegate casting of a lot of the background characters to the studios we work with, because the cast, I don't remember what the number of roles was in The Witcher or
roles
in
were like
Cyberpunk.
760, but like actors,
but there's no
like
possible way that we
150,
could actually
200,
we could review on an
Per language,
individual
of course.
basis 750 times, I don't know, 5 to 10 possible auditionees.
Incredible.
You know, and so we delegate, you know, a section of the casting, especially the background, tertiary or background characters, to the studios we work with. And the fact is that you know, without the art, it's a little bit of a crapshoot. I mean, there's you know, for some of the background characters, you'll have a 5-sentence description that gives their age, gives their, you know, approximate, you know, I don't know, a very sketchy idea of their character arc, an approximate idea of the kind of voice that we're looking for. And I remember, I don't know, halfway into the recordings, I don't know, having to recast probably in the range of 70 to 100 roles in Cyberpunk because they were just off relative to what was actually produced in the character department, you know. And it's part, and I mean, I consider it part of the process. It's breakage.
I
Fine-tuning.
actually remember this anecdote from The Witcher 2 when we actually cast King Foltest and we actually recorded the lines, and then suddenly he got like a super modern facelift in the character department, and suddenly from 50 he started looking 30. And it was like, what the hell?
Make him
And
younger.
when they're like, dudes, okay, the wrinkles need to come back because it just
absolutely.
doesn't.
Yeah, actually,
you know,
that's
doesn't
the
fit.
super good thing, because it sometimes happens that, you know, the voice finally you pick actually force a change over the actual model
Yes.
to make the model believable.
Carol, remember the Carol case?
That's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, we had this, like, you know, development is such a messy process sometimes, and we had this actually issue with Carol from Cyberpunk, who was actually, in one document she was actually depicted as an African American, on others she was a
remember
Latin, and like I think she was written Latin character, but then it turned out that like her model is African American, so we had to actually switch up
Swap it.
because in the end it's actually easier to change the model than re-record all those lines. But it was actually, she even got a face of one of our colleagues, Asia Vilichko.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
So yeah, there are situations like
Okay,
that.
but enough talking about other people's mistakes. Let's talk about the mistakes that we've made,
Well,
because I mean, casting is not a foolproof
That
process.
was our mistake as well, I would say.
Well, no, but I mean, it does occasionally happen that you go through a very, very, very sort of involved casting process. You get, you know,
Still doesn't
10
work.
samples. You get you're casting by committee. That is to say, you get 10 people's opinions that, like, you know, you want this actor, you want this voice for this character, and so on and so forth, and you end up putting them in the game, and you figure out after the first 2 or 3 sessions that you know, in spite of all of the safety measures that you took, you got it absolutely
I
wrong.
hate that. I
You know,
hate that. This
you got it absolutely wrong.
situation.
No, but I remember who was Anna Henrietta's sidekick.
this
De La Tour?
yes, this
Damien
Damien
De
De
La
La Tour.
Damien De La
Damien De
Tour.
La
Okay,
Tour,
so I mean, we thought we picked the right voice, and then, you know, the actor came into the studio, and we sort of couldn't help him along to actually getting the character, you know, and getting the character's, hatred for somebody else and jealousy over Anna Henrietta and so on and so forth. And it was I don't know, it was probably around pickup time where we said, no, this is not working, this is not landing, I mean, what happens then is like, okay, well, who do we have coming in for pickups? Let's see who can possibly do this, you know, and the gentleman who ultimately did the role, I think, just absolutely nailed it.
Yeah.
But it was a last minute change.
But it's basically very uncomfortable for everybody involved, for the talent, for us, for the director. Like, you know, that's the worst possible situation that, you know, somebody comes and tries their best best, and it's just doesn't work.
Well, yeah, but I have all the admiration in the world for voice
actor. Yeah.
Especially okay, there are limits on how many characters a given actor can do during a session in the States. Within a 4-hour session, they can't do more than 3 or 4 voices. Otherwise, you go into
things mixing.
Well, no, it's not about. Well, ultimately, yes, you don't want to give an actor. Yeah, there are also union rules. Right? It's about more equitably distributing, the work. But like once in a while, you will get. And a lot of the professional voice actors are such that you can get 5 to 7 absolutely differentiated characters.
I never know how to do that. It's incredible
from them, and it all happens within a 2 or 3 hour session. It's not unlike us writing 7 different characters 7 different ways at one time, but it's an actor doing 7 different characters and switching over as needed. And yeah, it's. I hope AI dies because of them.
I would. I still remember Paweł's big step as a voice actor for Gwent. Yeah, the Gwent card. Yeah, like actually.
Which one did you do?
Myself.
Yourself.
Yeah. So I had to create my own voice.
Yeah. I also did some Gwent cards actually.
I did it both in Polish and English, which was like super difficult.
Yeah, but like basically a lot of people don't know that, but for games of the sheer size of hours, like the voice actors, most of the time they record to nothing. Like they have no visual cues, they have no videos, they don't know how the scene look like.
But they only like very well in the booth.
Well, yeah, they need to be directed. Yeah. We need to have good director's comments, good scene comments. We, as the people who actually help our on-site directors, we know the game better than them. So we need to know what is the idea behind it, what's the vision, how the scene is supposed to look like in the end, because only then we are actually of any worth to the talents when we come in and we can say like, they give an interpretation and we can say like, it's cool.
It's not quite right.
Yeah, but
it's
cool.
But
Exactly, right? Because this or that is important for the scene, or this emotion or the character, hides something, etc. And it's so great when you
or
have
the character is passive aggressive.
Yeah, but like you have the talent, start like. For me, it's so amazing where like so small changes in the voice, in the pace and stuff can convey all those subtle emotion changes that are needed for this kind of performances we need for our games.
Yeah, our recent episode was with voice actresses, right? And actually Jane mentioned that she really likes this like emptiness, kind of, you know what I mean? Because that requires, of course, a lot of imagination. But the way she was actually thinking about that was like more, it gave her freedom at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's also a cool aspect of it. Because it's similar with motion capture actors, right?
Yeah.
It's actually the same thing, you have like, cameras around you, you're in a strange suit, and you have to imagine the environment around you and conflicts. Yeah. And it's difficult, but for some actors, it's actually like the people especially that are like more, I don't know, experienced with pantomime, those people are like, go into this so quickly. It's really amazing.
I just want to use this occasion to say that, like, we're talking about English, but this is something that we actually encounter with other languages, that we really try to make other language versions also feel as if the game was written in those languages. And very often, like, voice actors in other territories are so used to kind of follow the English, which is not bad. It's something that, like, it's kind of industry standard. Yeah. But, like, we want to go beyond that. And we always try to encourage our vendors and our talents to say, like, look, you got the same materials as the English talent. You have the same comments. You have the same context. do your own thing. Do your own thing. So we're really trying to push them. Sometimes there are some, like, for example, older actors that are really reluctant to do that. But like a lot of the actors say, like, wow, this is the first time I actually recorded a video game where I'm didn't
actually able to
do my own thing.
You know?
Like, of course, you have to keep like some technical requirements. It's not like that. Version in German will be completely off to the English. But people don't understand, I think, this is something that like I've noticed very often when, for example, German fans criticize other localizations as, well, the actors sound as if they were reading the script. And I feel it's because, for example, English is a little bit more timid than German. So like if you try to kind of keep at the same level in German as in English, it will sound flat because German is more
different tempo.
Yeah,
Animated.
it's different. Yes, animated. So basically, you need to actually give more to actually feel natural in German, and the same in Polish. Polish is also more like than English. So every language has its own kind of vibe as well. And
Just
if
call
you
it music.
can be music.
It is an art form. Like voice acting is an art form. But how much freedom do voice actors get? Like, when it comes to specific lines, can they like iterate, change words?
Depending on the language,
Or
like
is it
English
like
has the
script.
There are constraints actually coming not only
There are
from
constraints,
the,
but
also from the technical aspect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Mocap,
yeah.
like whether a scene is already mocapped or whether it's performance capture.
Yeah, we have
like
this, scene scaling, all this.
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
stuff,
but basically, if you're asking about changes that are due to the script, they do it all the time, like all the time. So basically, sometimes they propose some changes by their own. Sometimes they say the line, they read the line with a small change, and it all depends on the context. Sometimes it's we want to say like, okay, like seriously, but like this line needs to be like exactly like in the script.
Like it is, yeah.
But most of the time,
But I
it's
mean,
a collaborative effort.
Yeah. In general, I think we welcome ad-libbing.
Yeah.
If there aren't, technical barriers to accepting it, we'll generally accept it. But no, I mean, it's a creative process. It's a creative process at all levels and for everybody involved, I think. And there's no reason to sort of corral the actors and exclude them from that. Absolutely not. Yeah.
And also what's important that sometimes you write something, you read something, it feels right, and then you start recording it, it's like, oh, okay, that's not right. Like that just doesn't feel like, and then you have to kind of reshape the sentence a little bit to feel more natural or combine better with the other actors' lines and stuff, because not everything is visible on paper.
Yeah.
Sometimes
things sound better on paper.
Yeah, you need to
do.
go into the booth and actually hear that to say like, okay, like we need to kind of adjust it a little bit. So it's a normal thing. Yeah.
What about iconic characters? Like we talked about Jackie, but then we have, on the other hand, people like Doug, who did Geralt and is like known for that voice. I mean, there's so many voice actors who are associated with one voice. And there's like Yennefer, who had to have like a specific, and then we have Triss on the other side, who speaks totally different. Like, and
we
have Johnny. Well, that's the easy one.
But still,
But
dealing with it wasn't easy for sure, right?
Well, yeah, dealing with VIP actors is always a challenge because they're so super busy and, their schedules are full and they have filming for months somewhere. Yeah. So it was funny because, for example, Keanu was actually for EP1. He was the first actor we recorded. Like the first session for EP1 was with Keanu, and actually the last session at the very end for pickups was also with Keanu.
But it was true of the base game as well.
Yeah.
It was true of the base game as well. I remember doing stuff in pre-pandemic times actually.
I remember the very first
February. I don't remember.
That
must
was
have been
2019.
19.
Crazy.
Yeah, and we were doing. We did our first 3 days with Keanu.
Yeah,
but I feel like you mentioned EP1, which is Phantom Liberty, for people who don't know our internal nomenclature. But I feel like in Phantom Liberty, he really nailed Johnny. Like, you could see that the character, he was like really like knew everything about
Yeah,
him.
you
Like
can tell
after
he
the
was
lessons learned
living
from
already, right?
Cyberpunk, he
Yeah,
was like
yeah.
living the
He
character.
was living a
But
character.
this is a
It's
normal. Like it's not
incredible.
only Keanu. Like very often when you start recording, especially with actors that are just cast for a role and
Yeah.
it's new for them, so you start with them and then they grow into the role because
Yeah.
the more they record, they kind of feel the role better. They know exactly how
becomes
to
familiar.
do it. Yes,
that's-
and then
but that's
very often,
absolutely-
like in the process, you at the end of the recordings, you actually go back to the beginning and say, okay,
And-
now
and
you know
now-
the character,
Yeah,
so
let's-
let's go to the beginning,
let's go
and
back
now
to
you
the-
do it,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
the way it should
This
be
was
done.
funny
No,
because we had Minji Chang here, and she
Yeah.
said that she would stay in the voice where going out for like getting gas was something that she mentioned in the episode.
Yeah.
Like she would still
Stay in the
use
voice.
Songbird,
Yeah.
and it was like it stays with you, right? You do it like it's somewhere embedded in your head,
I'm
right?
listening
No,
to
but I
that
mean, but-
couple and I hear Geralt. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
but that's just it. Well, okay, so especially A-listers, I think are new to voiceover. Many A-listers, I think, are
Yes.
new to voiceovers, and so yes, it takes them a while to get into the role and so on and so forth. But the fact is that like you look at Doug Cockle, who was a professional voice actor before he would played Geralt in The Witcher 1. But the fact is that like Geralt has evolved from The Witcher 1 to The Witcher 2, and it's with The Witcher 3. No, maybe towards the end of The Witcher 2 that Doug hit his stride as Geralt, and that's when he started, I think, to put on the iconic shoes, and then he strode proudly in those iconic shoes through The Witcher 3 and the 2 expansions and so on and so forth, and the fact is that like.
He is the voice now.
Yeah, he is the voice. He
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the voice.
Yeah.
You know.
I would like to listen about some war stories. From you said about
from the
mistakes.
trenches.
Yeah, but something that that you can really pick out of your mind, like just like that. As
I think it's, in all honesty, I think it's like, raising children and having a baby and raising children. You forget all the bad stuff and you just remember.
Focus on the good stuff.
or even the bad stuff becomes like kind of meme stuff. Like I have one from the Polish recording of The Witcher 3 where Beata Jewisz, who was playing Yennefer, she had so much trouble with pronouncing the word laboratorium, which is laboratory. And basically the first quest with Yennefer is you have to kind of go to Mausack's laboratory, Ermien's laboratory, and steal something from the laboratory, etc. And she was constantly mispronouncing it. I was like, no, it's wrong. And she was like, what did I say? I was like, laboratorium. I was like, no, laboratorium. No, you said laboratorium. And, and she started, like, at some point we said, like, okay, like, we go to another quest because it just didn't make sense. Because there were, like, I don't know, 30 lines where she has to say that word.
Say
And
the
it
same word.
just didn't
terrible.
go. Or sometimes, when someone just starts, like, laughing uncontrollably and they just can't stop. Because there's a lot of, fun and
That's the
joke
worst.
cracking. But
It's
also
the
on
worst
the
when you have to say one word and you keep on saying it wrong, but you can't like shift
Yes.
your head. And when you start like in your
Yes.
head, try to slow down and
Yes.
say the word properly to hit the.
But then the line is
just sounds
the
weird.
line is shit,
It's-
basically.
Yeah, it's bad.
so sometimes it's better to just say like, okay, let's just leave it and let's come back a little bit later. But also
Or
there-
not.
Oh yeah,
Or not.
Yeah.
But also there are some moments like scenes even in Phantom Liberty. A small spoiler alert. Like there are some, for example, super heavy scenes with Songbird where like the emotion is
Super
so
emotional.
heavy that like you just
And it's not
don't
only emotion; it's like physical condition.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
so heavy.
that was the thing that we were
Yeah.
talking about. It's very hard to show the physical conditions. Like if you're I don't know if something is like taking you down to the floor because like
Borys
a
is
building
then pressing
collapsed.
the
It's
actor,
just
like,
like yeah, it's just like you have to what sit on the
piggybacking
actor or
Borys,
like,
you
or
have
like
to,
I don't know.
carry
Well,
Borys.
I actually heard some stories. I will not name the game,
off my
but from the voice actors I've been working with, that it was some shooter that it actually had like gym equipment in the studio. So basically, they were doing some stuff to actually have this natural, out of breath,
Okay.
that
makes sense.
Yeah, interpretation. So there.
I also heard some like weird stories that some people do like some lines while lying down, for example, or like sometimes or sitting or being in like an awkward position to like give a different, like to have a different delivery. It's
like
But that's crazy. Because what I normally think is like you just stand there and you talk to a microphone.
I don't know if it's by design, but it is true of many VO studios that I've been in, where the only person who actually has a sight line to the actor in the booth, because there's usually a window, is the engineer. Because they might notice the actor doing something like, I don't know, running their hand in front of it. And then everybody else, us as the quote unquote the client, the director even, is out of the sight line of the actor, because in the booth, the actors go through all kinds of interesting convolutions in order to deliver what they want to deliver, you know.
So
and
engineers same things.
engineers see things.
Actually, I remember
Engineers
one
see
thing. Actually, our late Miłek Reczek, who was playing Victor Vector, and he was playing Morgvark, among other the werewolf, in The Witcher 3. I remember he was so invested into the role where he had to do all this thing that he just kind of stripped. And when he went out of the studio, he was just soaking wet with sweat and everything.
You need to go feral because you're an animal, right? Like he was a werewolf.
He was
like you
really
need to feel it.
Yeah. So the actors are.
It was more hairy afterwards.
Maybe
and
I didn't
started
check.
developing.
I didn't check up closely, but yeah, it was great work.
But there are those actors who are very, very sort of composed in front of the microphone, and there are those actors who are full-on actors in front of the microphone.
And I think it's very important as for people who taking part in the recordings is that you kind of have to also feel the actors. So basically, you have to adjust to them. So there are actors who, for example, want to know the whole story, lore, everything behind it, and it's cool. But there are some actors that's like, I don't want to know, like, just tell me what I need to do, right? And like for me, I don't have a problem with it. I of course like to explain more, but like if I see that somebody has their way of working and it feels better for them if I do something in a specific way, I of course adjust to them, because it's our goal to make them feel easier and for them easier to do their work.
But have you ever encountered an actor that, let's say, he said to you, no, don't tell me anything about the world, just please tell me a few sentences about the role, and then they are actually doing it wrong, and you give them feedback and they are not getting it, and you're kind of in a moment that you need to actually tell them like, hey, you didn't get it, because you have to be open to listen about the world and all around it to really understand the feedback. Yeah. Because that's the context.
I
right?
actually had that in one of Blood and Wine recordings in the Polish studio, actually, with a very good dubbing actor, but who's more used to kind of do bigger characters. And it was a character from a side quest, and he went into the studio and he does all those things. I was like, okay, no, just do less. And
tone
he
it
was
down.
like, tone it down. It was like, okay, he does again. No, even less. It was like, so how I'm supposed to do it? Like just so plainly? I was like, yes. Exactly. This is what's needed for this character. And like he wasn't very happy about that, but like he pulled it off, right? So, but like you have to put your your foot down when you see that, like, you know, the talents have their own imagination, etc. But like this is our job to kind of make sure that if they strive into the wrong direction, to tell them like, okay, no, that's not what it's about. Because there are characters where you actually have to, you know, do more, you know, livelier, etc. But there are characters who actually don't need that. And especially with both in Cyberpunk and The Witcher, Borys might confirm that, like, especially the main characters are usually more grounded, more natural, and the background can be more like, you know, colorful, etc. So this creates this kind of like a vista of different kind of like performances. Because of course our games are like dark and gritty, but we sometimes like to kind of, take the needle and just take some of the air out of the game, to have some comedic moments, to have some lighter moments, and you have to juggle it.
I mean, the first Witcher franchise is actually exemplary of that. Geralt was sort of conceived as a character who would be, quote unquote, an everyman, and the straight guy, to absolutely everybody else emoting and getting emotional around him. And it was Geralt, listening to peasants tearing their hair out and scratching their asses and so on and so forth, and Geralt,
like following books actually, and then. Yeah, because
he
was more emotionless, so. I would say, and then
because The Witcher is supposed to be emotionless.
But on the other hand, they made fun of him at some point. His companions, that he's just like emo Geralt. There was this scene I remember.
You're always unhappy. What's wrong with you?
Exactly. But he developed over the course of like in the third part. There's so many comedic cool moments with him, and he's sometimes even more human, which is great than humans. And that was the theme of it. Some themes of Witcher 3, I believe, at least. Sure. Yeah.
There's also, I feel like there's a little bit of emotion, like his connection to Ciri and Witcher 3, like all that stuff. Like you can tell, like he
fatherhood, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. You could tell. You can see the shift in the character. It's not just I am this mercenary for hire. I have no emotion. Like there is a moment for like comedic relief, which I think you also need a little bit of that in this dark and gritty world.
Yes.
And also you need a little bit of space of emotion to show the characters like personal growth and change throughout the whole process.
Guys, the aspect of your teams, how many people you have and how many languages they speak?
So we're currently, basically our team consists of like 3 sub-teams, but like we all work together. So there is Borys's team, English adaptation, with Borys, and we have 3 English adaptation specialists. So these are all people who are native English with Polish as their second language. Which is not easy to find, especially like with Polish good enough to kind of, localize from Polish into English. Then there is my part, so there are localization project managers, so people who are in charge of coordinating the localization process into other languages with our external vendors, but also producing English recordings, for example. And basically, each person that I hired also deals or kind of takes care of one of our more important languages. So we have like, a Spanish person, an Italian person, a Russian person, a Brazilian Portuguese, and a French. I deal with German. We also have Polish. We have also our colleague in Japan who deals with Japanese. So yeah, it's a multi-culti gang. And we also have a localization QA. So there are 3 people who help us in our daily tasks and also coordinate the localization testing, which is very important at the end of the production. And it's also done by external vendors, because imagine we have 19 languages to test, and each language requires like 5 or 6 testers.
Crazy.
So it's like over 100 people at some point that are playing the game in different languages. So it's a lot of people. Yeah.
It's crazy. What about the process? Like, does everybody like work on, like, I would say, since you have a person that, because we normally all in the office speak English, so that's how we communicate, and then they specialize in a given language, and all of them at a given time are replaying the game in the localized version, and then based on that, changing and adjusting the wordings and going back and forth. So it's a long iterative back and forth process, right?
Yeah, and for example, especially during the recording times, if we actually happen to be in the studio, it sounds like an international call center, because everybody is with their own studio and giving directions to the actors in the local languages. Yes, so it's quite a crazy time. But like as you said, the whole point of having those people is actually we're not just like sending the localization to our vendors saying like do
your thing.
Yeah.
do your thing and that's
Or
it.
just implement it.
Yeah, exactly. So we're actually reading through the scripts. We're giving feedback to the translators. We work with them on terminology. We cast the actors in all the languages. And then we also take part in the recordings. We direct together with the local directors, and also then play and kind of make performance improvements and make sure that everything works as intended. So yeah, we can kind
And then also in the end goes to like gets QA'd by QAs who
and usually at
specialize in localization, right?
Yeah, but like usually at the same time we are also playing.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Because especially for quality bugs, performance bugs, it's really hard to get good feedback from people from outside. So when it comes to the fact like to say like, okay, this scene needs to be
Because it's a
recorded
judgment
because it's a
call.
judgment call. Yeah, and people are afraid of that. Maybe you have to have like a kind of weird set of skills which are hard to learn. It's more something that you gain by experience, by, for example, also watching other productions with which are localized to see what works, what doesn't work, to have like a understanding what you want to achieve in a given scene. And sometimes it's also like that. Like you imagine something, you record it, and then you put it into the game, and then all the other things get in, and it just doesn't work. Doesn't work together.
Redo it.
You have to redo it. Like
Yeah.
a prime example from Cyberpunk, it was something that I actually brought up. That like those 3 end quests happen after like another breakdown of V, and I felt like, okay, it's kind of weird that they sound normal at the end of the game. So for example, we recorded the whole quest in all languages again because I felt like you need to feel that's the end, that they're at the very end of their strength, their fatigue and stuff. Like it's kind of weird because on the other hand, like you're this super overpowered gameplay tank that just goes through the enemies, but like for narrative reasons it really has to feel that like, okay, they're at the end of the road, they need to get there.
Tired of life.
Because they will just die.
It evokes different
soon.
emotions in the player, right? Once you're playing it feels just real.
Yeah, but just going back to localization QA, especially the external localization QA. In this day and age, everyone's a critic, right? I mean, the fact is,
everybody has an opinion.
Everybody has an opinion, and everybody has a forum upon which to
or Twitter or X.
I mean, your choice, whatever you want to do. Rotten Tomatoes. But the fact is that when you go in for localization QA, you have to give the testers sort of palpable criteria according which to judge something, and judgment and sort of making those judgment calls, I don't think is within those criteria. You leave that.
That was already done.
Yes, or
in some sense,
it needs to be done closer to the source.
So good side of constraints and good side of like kind of framing, like without that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I just want to say, since we're on the topic of kind of like as how your team is built, what about starting in such a team? Like, what type of background do you need to have? Because it feels like you should probably have a background in linguistics, a background in cinematography in some sense, but also you should kind of know, I don't know, it's a mix of everything. Like, it also depends which language you're working on, right? You need to know the culture, you need to know the slang, and also sometimes you need to be like, Cyberpunk, great example is like, you don't know what will happen in the next, 50 years. Like, so it's...
Like for
what background?
For my part of the team, actually, most of the people have some linguistic background, right? The translators or linguists, but like you basically need to have this kind of interest in the language, right? To kind of see things, have opinion on things, and when it comes to recordings, it's actually more about the hearing. It's actually a funny thing because for some time I had very good friends who had a band, and I've been going around with them, etc. Like I'm super bad at doing music, but hearing all the mistakes I can hear everything. So I think this is super helpful when you actually are in the studio, because you hear that like, oh, they stressed the wrong word, or like you want something a little bit different, right? But like most of the stuff I actually learned on the way, so to say. So it's hard to, like, I guess I imagine that like being maybe a professional, voice director would help, but like localization is so much more. So basically you have to be all rounder.
In all honesty, I think you have to be a generalist.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the one thing that we don't need to know and don't need to be interested in our field is like knowing, a programming language like C++ or something. That we can do without.
But that doesn't mean not being technical, because we need to be technical.
You have to be technically savvy.
Yeah.
But apart from that, you basically have to know quite a bit about, I don't know, life, say. But in addition to that, you have to be curious. And curiosity is something that we carry on a daily basis and employ on a daily basis and pursue on a day basis and so on and so forth. And I mean, especially it's true for I think all creative professions.
True.
Yeah, curiosity generally owns judgmental kind of approach.
Yeah.
That's the way.
Curious about everything, and I feel like it's
Exactly.
like it's always the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And probably also playing a lot of different games, and then
games, but also generally culture, right?
Yeah.
Language, so like books and
that's what I was
movies
gonna
and
say, like
series,
books,
like
movies,
looking, we can take inspiration from, for example, like normal series with actors, like how they perform there, and we can take it from there and kind of pass it to the voice actors to kind of try to achieve something similar. So there are a lot of fields of inspiration, but basically, kind of consuming culture, all kinds of different media is definitely needed.
incredible. I feel like we could talk longer. Like for real. I also wanted to talk about different other characters. I really wanted to talk about like Emmer van Emreis and his delivery by Charles Dance, which I loved. For me, it was like perfect. And actually, I always had this thing that we talk amongst each other. Since we all speak, the majority of us, not all, here speak Polish and English, and it's like, well, how do you play The Witcher? It's like, you play it mainly in Polish or in English, and so it's like, well, I like this voice actor from this version here, but and I had the same problem with Cyberpunk. I was like, man, I'm playing Cyberpunk in English, but Witcher I'm playing in Polish. But then I replay it, I'm like, I'll try in English.
Exactly. You have
And then
to
I saw some people like streaming the game, and they're like, they're native English speakers. They're like, I want to play it with Japanese, but with English subtitles. And then you get like this totally different delivery, and it's like, whoa.
I want to tell you one important thing that a lot of people don't understand, and exactly this is coming back to this discussion, I want to play the original language. Even me, who's working on it on a daily basis in the company, it's totally normal when you play in a language version for a very long time and then you switch to another one. It always feels like, whoa. Okay, that's weird. That sounds like kind of, off. Yeah. But this is a normal phenomenon, and like you just have to kind of give yourself some time to kind of get used to that. Like, the voices sounded different, the language sounds different, but each language version has something to offer. And there are things that are the best in the English version, and there are some things that are the best in the Polish version, and there are the things that are the best in the Japanese version. So basically, it's a whole different experience. But like this kind of feeling of being off when you switch is something that like even I, after so many years, have that. Especially like when I play, for example, in German for a very long time, and then I switch to English or Polish, like, whoa, okay, that's not how it should sound. It goes weird. It goes every way, so to say.
It's not unlike, changing your diet. You become a vegetarian, and like at first everything is bland, and you're like,
So
where's my umami, and,
exactly?
yeah,
What
and so on
language
and
is a
so forth,
carnivore?
and but after a while you start discovering the nuance,
Yeah,
and
You can make tofu taste
exactly. There's smoked tofu, and there's hard tofu, and there's
Yes,
soft tofu,
exactly.
and there's soft smoked and hard smoked. And
there's nothing better, for example, than SpongeBob SquarePants voicing Skippy in the German version. How cool is that? You don't have that in English or
Exactly,
Polish.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
really
those iconic voices that are
it was
in different
coincidence.
languages. Yeah.
No, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate
Everything
decision
was
to actually
according to plan.
No, seriously, that was a deliberate decision to
if
actually
you say so.
I've been there. I actually, spoke with Fabian who proposed that. So
The war stories.
now, he's just jealous that he
Yeah,
doesn't have that. But people love skipping English as well. No worries.
Yeah.
So it's. But this is also what it pertains. So like every language version, you try to find some small quirks and gimmicks that will be just for the fans in a given language for them to see like, okay, you really took the special care to give them something extra. Right?
Yeah, this is, since we're going to be putting a pin in it, this is what I wanted to end on. Why? Like the big question, but in a short sentence, if you could tell me, why go the extra mile? Why be more than just translate it like it is? And
I mean,
why?
Because we're ambitious and we want to give our players the best possible experience. And I think this goes
and also
for
something that you mentioned, that players actually notice this.
Yeah,
which I feel
they do.
It really makes the whole thing feel like it's worth
Rewarding.
it. And also what Borys said, that it's a creative process, that it's an art form.
Yes.
So it's more.
In the end, we're in the entertainment industry. And the fact is,
Thank you. I love that.
And the
I
fact
love
is,
that. That's what Adam Badowski always says.
But
like, when things get serious,
absolutely.
remember we're in the entertainment industry.
We are in the entertainment industry.
Exactly.
And as frivolous as it sounds, entertainment is one of the most important things that people have in their lives. And we go the extra mile because we want to provide the best possible entertainment for everybody.
We care.
Yeah, we care.
Love
we
it.
care.
That's why we're doing that
Exactly.
for so many years. So how many years are you? Oh, and let's finish on this note.
We're going to beep that, I hope. No. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Although I feel
Thank
like
you.
we should probably do
Thank
more
you.
Well, yeah,
of
second
these episodes.
episode.
Like, right now.
Yeah,
People, if
there's
you're
a
watching,
million stories.
like
you can
seriously,
tell.
people, if you're watching that, leave a thumbs up and a comment. You want a second episode?
Yeah, you want to hear
know.
more.
Yeah,
Let
I
us
want to
know.
hear
And
more.
this is-
And please, let's vote. Do we get to drink beer during the next one or not? I say I'm voting for beer.
I'm the vodka guy. I'm sorry. I'm a proper Polish person.
Why not to have it both?
From
Right?
soft to
Okay,
hard alcohol.
okay, but I'm proposing an informal rule. If anybody comes on a second time onto AnsweRED, they come on with alcohol.
Let's do this.
Well, we got to do it. That's tradition now. Yeah.
I don't know if YouTube allows that actually. So
We'll be fine. We'll just say it's tea.
We'll
or
put them in
wine.
paper bags.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right.
yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank
you,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank
So much
you.
fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks a lot for tuning in during this AnsweRED podcast. We hope that you had fun at least as much as we did, right?
Yup, it was an incredible episode. As always, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Let us know what you're thinking. If you want to see someone specific on the episode, also give us those recommendations because we want to showcase the full spread of all people working at AnsweRED, and we can't wait to hear from you. And that's it. Thank you for watching, as
Thanks
always.
a lot and see you next time.
Yup, see you next time. Bye.